GingerGM.
Well, I'm now going to go over Game 2 from this year's World Chess Championships. And in this case, we have Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces, his first white of the World Championships, considered advantage, like in tennis. You get to serve as such. And Fabiano with the black pieces. So very interesting to see how these guys are going to come out in the opening battling. In the last World Championships, most of the games started with E4, E5, and they tended to be long, positional, drawn-out battles. Some may even call boring battles. But this year is proving to be a lot more interesting. And one thing I did predict before the match is that we would see, I thought we'd see a lot more games starting with D4 or D4 openings as such, some transposition, because this move seems to lead to many more flexible positions. I mean, again, with E4, black can just play E5 and the positions are very similar. With D4, there's many different things you can do as white. You can play London systems with bishop F4. You can set up in numerous ways. So it's quite a more, I would say, rich battlefield. Black here, Fabiano, started with knight to F6. And now Magnus played knight to F3. And this is often a preferred move order to C4. One of the problems you could encounter with C4 is the move C5. It's not really a problem, but after D5, there's a lot more options black can play. For example, the Benko, even though I very much doubt that was Fabiano's intention. But anyway, knight to F3 is a very normal move. Pawn to D5, and now C4, and E6, knight to C3. And this is quite interesting actually already, because Magnus hasn't played this position often, I would say. I mean, in the last year he's been really sticking to E4, so maybe he's been saving some stuff here. And this is a position I've played for many years, and he must be well prepared, because there's a number of options which black may fancy playing here. For example, C6 is an extremely sharp move, and that leads to the semi-Slav, which can get incredibly complicated after bishop G5. Bishop B4 is a Rogozin variation. Again, this is very popular nowadays, very, very popular, very, very intense, very, very complex. Even pawn takes C4 is something, the Vienna variation, you need to know what to do. In the actual game, if we go back, after knight C3, Fabiano picked probably the most solid option, bishop to E7, and this is the traditional Queen's Gambit. Magnus put the bishop on F4. I've actually made a DVD on this, so I do have some knowledge of this move. The other move is bishop G5, but this move is the modern treatment. And after bishop to F4, we had the mainline castles E3. And now, well, a move which has a little bit gone out of fashion. The move that's now current fashion is knight Bd7. Because when black eventually plays C5 and white captures on C5, the black knight wishes to come to this square and then into E4. So therefore getting a very good centralized knight. But in this actual position after E3, C5 is the old main line, but it's not as popular nowadays. Here white invariably takes on C5, bishop takes C5, and there's a couple of ways to play this, but the main line is queen C2. Now you can play bishop E2, but what you tend to try doing in these positions as white, you tend to wait for black to capture on C4 before moving the bishop. Because, for example, if you play bishop E2 here, black can capture on C4, and you have to waste another tempo moving your bishop. So it's quite subtle tempo gains, and queen C2 is a very useful move. You eventually, it will help connect the rooks, and that's what you want to do at the start of the game. You free up the D1 square, and this is a great position to put a rook on, lining up against the queen, as we will see. And you just want to wait and see what black does. And black now plays knight C6, developing some ideas of knight B4, a little bit annoying. So now we stop that with pawn to A3, controlling B4. And here, the main line, queen to a5. And this move is stopping b4 due to some basic tactics. Knight takes b4, putting a little bit of pressure on c3. So knight to e4 is one idea that black plays in this position, and freeing up the d8 square, as we're going to see. Now, when I did my DVD on this for ChessBase, the line I recommended for white here, and I'll just show you very quickly, and I really had my fingers crossed here, was the move castles queenside. And there's a very funny story about this. It's actually the first time it came into I suppose big news was when Spielman used it in his candidates match against Nigel Short, two English top players, and this goes back to the 80s. And Spielman saw this move in an article when he was I think travelling in Norway, and it's an article, I believe, written by Jonathan Tisdale, a Grandmaster, and he was lucky to find in the chess column in this Norwegian paper this move being given. And it's a move which won a very nice game against Nigel Short. Nowadays, the modern way to play this as white is to aim for h7. And you go h4 and you go knight g5. Now, I expect theory has moved on very, very much here. The old main line here used to be bishop e7. I've never really understood this move, bishop e7. It seems like rather a weird tempo loss because b4 is not actually aimed. But bishop e7 and now h4. And I've had some great victories of this. You just want to go knight g5 and checkmate on h7. And it's very, very dangerous system for black. But I'm sure, of course, Fabiano had this castle's queenside extremely well prepared. And at this level, you don't want to walk in to your opponent's preparation. And it's not really Magnus's style. Magnus, doesn't really... I mean, he can play great tactics, don't get me wrong. But at his level, at this level, going for this full frontal kill, it just doesn't tend to work against such a well-prepared opponent. So he went for the old main line, rook to d1. And here is the first shock of the game. A couple of main moves. Rook to e8 is one main move, and I believe the other one may be something along the lines of knight to e4 here as well, which I think Andrew Martin, international master, played against you once. The story behind rook to e8 here, trying to play e5, is quite intriguing. It was played in the semi-final, I believe, of the World Championships, or was it the final? Oh God, oh dear, am I going to get this wrong? In 1978, between Karpov with the black pieces, he played this new idea, the idea of going e5 against Korchnoi, and Korchnoi fought for a serious amount of time, 40 minutes after rook e8, and nearly refuted the idea. And this is quite intriguing because in this World Championship match, the rook goes one more square. It goes to d8. And indeed, in this position, Magnus was quite shocked to see this move. Obviously not part of his preparations, so Caruana's got the first blow in. And he said in the press statement afterwards that this move is quite unnatural because the way to try and refute this, as now the black queen does not have the d8 square, is for a maneuver which is another typical maneuver in this variation, and that is knight to d2. The knight aims to come over to b3, and as you can hopefully see, if the knight arrives on the b3 square, that queen can get in an awful amount of danger. And they briefly said in the press conference that this led to some incredibly sharp and complex lines, and I doubt this will be repeated, but Fabiano was obviously very confident that this was nothing to worry about in his game. And knight b3 on the surface, very hard move to stop. How do you stop it? And this is really the test of the line. I mean, just looking at it, what could black's idea potentially be here? Well, I mean, this is a good question because this is a really big threat, and I'm assuming that you could think of ideas with d4, but let's have a look. d4, knight b3, and this doesn't seem to work because this knight controls too many squares. So it would have been very interesting to see after knight d2 what Fabiano had prepared, but obviously he did. I think Magnus made a wise decision. When you're walking into your opponent's prep and it's clear that he was here, then you don't want to follow in the sharpest line. So he tried to find a line which gave him a small advantage. So he went bishop e4, knight e4, typical idea, castles, Knight takes, pawn takes. This pawn on a3 is poisoned because there's a rook a1 trapping the queen or pinning the bishop. And here there is probably a threat actually of white playing knight g5, which is very annoying with this idea. So Fabiano plays h6, and now Fabiano is still playing incredibly quickly a4, and now a very clever and quality move by Fabiano. Magnus at this point still probably thinking he had some way to get an advantage because black's queen side is underdeveloped, and you may be able to take advantage of this now that you're castled. The idea of this a4 move is really, I would say, to gain the b5 square, and even to threaten ideas such as rook to b5, just giving that square a little bit more support. In other variations, you might want to take on d5 and put the bishop on this square. So it's a natural move, but this next move is very clever. Knight to e7. The reason this is clever is because, first of all, now taking on d5 doesn't become as attractive because the knight gains this particularly strong square. The knight also has this g6 square, and you can try to gain the bishop pair. And it was around here that Magnus probably sort of came to the conclusion that he doesn't have anything out the opening. He played knight to e5, and this is a move which I think would be hard to resist. Putting a knight into central square, trying to stop bishop d7, or at least winning the bishops. But maybe this is a little bit premature. Bishop d6 was played, and all of a sudden white's pieces might actually be a little bit overextended. Magnus took on d5, knight takes d5, this knight maneuver clearly working well. I think white really had to take on d5 at some point because his pawn structure, and this is one thing from the opening I should have noted, white's pawn structure is frankly quite disgusting over on the queen side. You know, if we go back a couple of moves, you don't want to keep these pawns like this. They're double pawns, and later on a rook will come there and it will smack you hard on that file. And also the pawns being split generally would favour black. The only chance white has is to use the extra open file. So I think taking here is very normal. And now he went for simplification. And this is one thing Magnus is very good at. And I think, you know, everything's worked very well for Fabiano here. And Magnus realised now it's time to change gears. Time to not aim to win this game, but to pull the pedal back and aim to try to simplify into a draw, because structurally speaking his pawns are worse. One tactic I would like to point out, knight c4 is something that again looks very dangerous, attacking the queen, attacking the bishop. But after queen c2, queen c3 should I say, the tactics just work in black's favour. For example, queen takes queen, knight takes, and we're going to take something with check, and we've won a very useful pawn. So this knight c4 move does not work in that position. So bishop f3. One more option was potentially knight takes f7, but again at this point Fabiano had blitzed out his moves. He was up on the clock, so he was obviously prepared for this. So there's a lot of mind games going on at this level, and sacrificing or playing such a tactical idea is something you have to be very sure about. And you know, the potential idea could be to use something on the file here, you know, something with c4. But I mean, again, you're walking into prep, and both players in the press conference said that black has a number of ways to get out of this. I mean, there's not really an immediate threat here, even in this position, and maybe even black can just start to move the queen to a decent square, and queen c5 could actually be a problem here, pinning the pawn, guarding the rook so the knight can move, for example. So this shows you the dangers of playing, you know, in a sacrificial way if your opponent is prepared. One thing again, how modern chess has changed, you know, and is changing, is that nowadays the defense has become much more playable because computers are showing humans how to defend. Computers can defend, humans can't defend so well. Computers find resources in unbelievably hopeless looking positions. And another thing I think is very intriguing after the game is that Fabiano mentioned that in actual fact, he believed computers have opened up the game. They've given more possibilities because they've shown that more things are possible. You can get away with more things. You can get away with more dubious looking ideas because computers are black and white. They go over your visual aspects of the position and they're very concrete. Even though I bloody hate computers, I wish they just disappeared or weren't around, but I wouldn't be filming this now, would I? So we have some simplifications. Knight takes f4, bishop takes e5, and lots of things come off. And we go into this ending here where Magnus has to be a little bit careful. I wouldn't like this as white. Again, there's something about pawn structure here that's important. For the main thing here is black has two pawn islands. This mass of pawns over here, when they're next to each other, it's called a pawn island. That's one pawn island. They can all defend each other. There's another one over here, so two pawn islands. White has one pawn island. They can defend each other. That pawn is weak. It can't be defended. That pawn is weak. It can't be defended. So structurally, there's a bit of danger here for white. If black can complete his development nice and safely, he can start attacking this. So Magnus really plays very well, not surprisingly, to stop this. Rook b1, hitting b7, stopping the bishop from developing. Rook b8, renewing the threat. Queen d3. And this pawn here was always very risky to take, especially in this situation, because queen d8 check, and you're tying up these pieces and you're gaining a good attack. You don't want to grab that one. So bishop d7, a5, just trying to, if you're in a worse position, swapping pawns off can help. So you're trying to hope him for b6, getting rid of one of your weaknesses. Bishop d6, and now a very important move, queen d6. Again, this shows the difference in level between these players and me, I would say. I mean, I would not be wanting to go into the following ending thinking I'd have to struggle for a lot. But I was watching some of the commentators, the top level GMs, and they were just saying it's a draw. And I was thinking, really, is this following ending a draw? Magnus obviously knew it as a draw. The next series of moves is quite forced. So lots of things get exchanged. These pawns now look even more disgusting. The king comes across and Magnus now aims to liquidate some pawns. And this was a very clever idea. He's aiming to swap pawns off. The more pawns that get swapped off, the closer the draw is. He plays c5. King d7 is just in time. And now with the king coming to c6, Magnus swaps some more pawns off. You can't go rook takes because of obviously the a-pawn queens. So we now have more exchanges and we get the following ending here. And after e5, I still wouldn't be very happy with this, but the funny thing is these double pawns, the more I looked at this, actually help white's defense, funnily enough. Let's just go forwards because this d-pawn will drop. The black king can come to here and the rook can come here. So it's going to be 4 versus 3. But rook endings, it's very hard to win a rook ending if all the pawns on the same side of the board and you don't have a passed pawn. You need to have a passed pawn in order to win a rook ending. And one way to look at this, let's just wait until that d-pawn is taken. They mess about a little bit, but it's eventually taken. Magnus knows it's lost, so he gives it up, and we get this position. And in actual fact, having these double pawns in this situation may benefit white. If you can picture this pawn on f3 being on g3, it's a lot easier. So still probably be a draw, and it is a technical draw, but it's a lot easier to get a draw because black has a plan. Imagine that pawn being on g3, and let me just explain the plan. Black can, you know, it takes a while, but he can go g5, f4, e4, e3. So if you can picture that structure of these black pawns on these highlighted squares, and this pawn being on g3, you can see that black will get, in that position, a passed e-pawn. Now, if black tries the same maneuver here, g5, for example, in this position, and then he tries to go e4 at some point, well, white has an extra pawn to capture there. So this pawn structure, white has a little fortress here. White can just remain here, and that means that black will never be able to get a passed pawn unless it's a very weak passed pawn. So in actual fact, this is a very compact structure here, and black can't improve. Obviously black tries, for a little bit, and Magnus looked very confident when I was watching. I mean, again, I still wouldn't want to defend this myself, but he just plays with rook on the side, a very nice tactic leaving his rook on the side, annoying that king and not doing anything else. It's up to black to make progress, and black here figures that he has to play e4. Otherwise, how does he make any progress? And again, we see here that this pawn was very useful. Otherwise, if there was a pawn on g3, this might be a passed pawn, and you can't win without a passed pawn. And here, black can just not get a passed pawn. It's impossible. There's no way. So you can't get a queen if you can't get a passed pawn. The only chance black has is maybe to get a pawn to h3, check. And if you can imagine that pawn getting there, that would force the white king to the back rank when it would be in a very bad situation. So what does Magnus do? He stops that idea with h3. And now I think he's just got the perfect fortress position. He waits, and there's nothing that you can do. Again, Magnus here played the next move very quickly and very confidently. I mean, king h2 would leave the f pawn a bit weak. So king f1 is more accurate. You can always check the black king from behind or from the side. And this is a very important technique in rook endings. When you're trying to defend, make sure your rook is a long way away from the opposing king so you can check it away from the position. You know, you want to give yourself a lot of checks to get that opponent's king into an unfortunate situation. And Fabiano could have maybe tortured a little bit more, but in basic reality, there's no chance here at all. The h-pawn is not weak. It can be defended with a rook b3 or king g2, and there's nothing at all that can be done. So maybe a slightly more boring game there, you could say, from the two players. But I still found it very fascinating. I mean, this novelty of rook d8, if we go back to the opening, was the main thing that really threw Magnus. Interesting to see Magnus playing sharp d4 lines, but Fabiano incredibly well prepared here, much better prepared than in the first game, and he who has got the first opening new move in is gaining the advantage at the moment. This is clear. So I think now that they're properly warmed up, we're going to have an absolute bloodbath in the next game in round 3, which I'm incredibly looking forward to, and I hope you are as well. I'm still going to put Magnus as favourite to win this match. I think he's going to do it. Give me your views, and I'm going to be doing a YouTube video every game as quickly and as sort of intensely as I can, but I want to keep it reasonably sharp, because looking at viewer figures, most people fall asleep after about 15 minutes. Sorry guys, must be my voice. Now, you can log off now, by the way. Us at GingerGM have actually created a little video, a little promo video. I didn't want to play it at the start in case you wanted to get straight to the chess, but I want to show you this little promo video now. It's only a minute long, and do please subscribe. Do please also like the video. Thank you very much for your patience, and I will try to get around to answering your comments soon. Goodbye for now.